Assalamu alaikum, this is Samana Siddiqui, and you're watching the best of Muslim Network News. Today we are bringing the top reports and analyses of the week. Let's start with the reports.
90% of all people killed by U.S. drones are civilians. That is the data from the United States Air Force. No one knew about this until Daniel Hale told the world. Daniel Hale served the National Security Agency as an intelligence analyst. He leaked 17 classified documents to expose them in 2014. Now he is sitting in a jail. That is the cost of telling the truth in this world.
I'm sorry because I'm up here because I was for a short period of time during my military career as an analyst working with unmanned systems deployed to Afghanistan.
Those documents contained details about U.S. kill lists and civilian casualties. The Justice Department under President Obama did not prosecute Hale, but the Trump administration decided to punish him. In 2021, Hale was sentenced to 45 months in prison for violating the Espionage Act of 1917. The judge told Hale that you are not being prosecuted for speaking out about the drone program that killed innocent people. You could have been a whistleblower without taking any of these documents. Killers of civilians are free. No investigations, no charges. But the truth teller is in prison. Peace activists, however, remember Hale. In August 2021, he was honored with the Sam Adams Award for Integrity in Intelligence. He was honored for performing a vital public service at a great personal cost. Later that month, U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar wrote to President Biden requesting a full pardon. The world will need many more truth tellers for saving unknown lives. In the meantime, drones will continue to kill, and President Biden promises more drone attacks. 10% will be suspected terrorists, but 90% will be, for sure, innocent people. May God protect them. Children, seeing their white Toyota Corolla in the Haji Bogra neighborhood, ran towards it, and it was their last moment on this earth. It was also the last U.S. attack before the last of the American soldiers had left Afghanistan. An Afghan family of 10 with 7 children were obliterated. The driver, Zamari Ahmadi, was an engineer and had worked for an American charity for 16 years. The whole family had special immigrant visa offered by the United States. They had packed all their belongings and were waiting for the word to be escorted to Kabul airport. But the message Washington sent instead was a rocket into their homes. It was late Sunday afternoon on August 29, 2021, in Kabul. The Defense Department said that it had blown up a vehicle laden with explosives. Anisa is the spouse of Zamari Ahmed. He cared for his neighbors. He was in a foreign-run office. He had a flight to go to America today. Why are you lying to us? Where is Daesh here? His American organization agrees. They say that just a day before his death, he served meals to hungry women and children at a local refugee camp in Kabul. Here is Samia, the surviving daughter. Her wedding was set for coming Friday. Her fiancé, Ahmed Nasser, was however killed as well. Ahmed was a contractor with the U.S. military who was waiting to be evacuated. Samia says, "At first I thought it was the Taliban, but the Americans themselves did it." Samia said she staggered outside, choking, and saw the bodies of her siblings and relatives. "I saw the whole scene," she said. "There were burnt pieces of flesh everywhere." This is Arzu. She lost 3 small children to the drone attack. Here are some of the young victims in the extended family of 10. Here are two brothers, 5-year-old Armin and 3-year-old Binyamin. And here is 2-year-old Sumayya. Here is Faisal. He was 15 years old. This young man, Zamir, was 18 years old. Farzad was just 8 years old. Some sandals are left while dreams about America are gone. America says it will investigate. In the meantime, the war over the horizon is still on the horizon. American soldiers are gone, but peace is still not here. ISIS in Afghanistan calls itself ISIS Khorasan. If you Google what is Khorasan, you will find everything about Khorasan wheat and Khorasan bread. That is delicious. But where is the real Khorasan? Khorasan is a historic region. It comprises the present territories of northeastern Iran, parts of Afghanistan, and southern parts of Central Asia. In ISIS' transnational ideology and anti-Shia agenda, it calls itself Khorasan. The US media refers to them as ISIS-K or IS-K. They've been suspected of nearly 100 attacks against civilians in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They are also considered responsible for roughly 250 clashes with the US, Afghan, and Pakistani forces since January 2017. ISIS-K and the Taliban have been fighting with one another for a while. Here is a map of ISIS-K clashes with the Taliban in 2017 and 2018. ISIS-K believes the Taliban have become too moderate. They may be right. The New York Times reported that American military and Taliban commanders not only collaborate for the safe evacuation, but also to deter ISIS-K.
Ahmed Ajam spent almost 13 years in Guantanamo Bay prison. He was never charged with any crime. Ahmed was never tried for any crime. He was 25 years old when he was captured and sent to Guantanamo. Finally, in 2014, at the age of 37, he was released in Uruguay. Uruguay took in 6 Guantanamo prisoners in exchange for economic aid. Ahmed is originally from Syria, where he could not go back. Instead of living the nightmare of Guantanamo forever, Ahmed decided to turn his life around with sweets. Ahmed found success using his sister's recipes to make pastries. So he created a small store called Gastronomy Arab. Uruguayan cuisine is a fusion of cuisines including a few dishes that were introduced to Spain by the Arabs. But Ahmed's focus on Arab sweets is adding to the Uruguayan food landscape. His stand has small chalkboards advertising some of his wares: baklava, coffee, juice, the sesame paste tahini, or Uruguayan-style candy.
Muchísimas gracias.
Ahmed was one of the roughly 780 people sent to Guantanamo prison since 2002. There are still 39 people in the Guantanamo prison.
Thank you for watching the reports. Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we will share the best analysis segments of the week.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Today, we're looking at a part of the situation going on in Afghanistan with Irfan Yar. And Irfan's research focus is on the Taliban's movement in Afghanistan, which is perfect for this conversation. He's looked at security issues and terrorism and a bunch of stuff on Afghanistan. And from what I hear, you have family in Afghanistan.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak my voice here. Yes, my family members are in Afghanistan. And as you know, the situation is very tense there, so it's a little bit worrisome.
Well, the thing about it is, and many Americans, and I'm sure Europeans and Canadians, you know, we shouldn't have been there in the first place. Then we go in and we build up a fake economy, right? One where you get the country gets dependent on military dollars, right? And eventually, and that was a bad move on the government's part, but it became dependent. Now what's the deal?
Well, I think it is very clear that American has no intention, you know, to stabilize Afghanistan. They clearly mentioned, even President Biden, you know, stressed that time and again, that their objective in Afghanistan was not to stabilize Afghanistan, but to achieve its objective, which was to, you know, kill the perpetrator of 9/11, Osama bin Laden. And of course, it did spend some money in Afghan infrastructure. However, that is very pathetic and weak. Right now, the Afghanistan, if there is no foreign aid, Afghanistan is, you know, is left to the mercy of God. So yeah, like there is no stable economy, no stable infrastructure. It's always, you know, for the last 20 years, dependent mostly on foreign aid. There are no internal revenues which can, you know, cover the government expenses.
Well, why isn't Afghanistan self-supporting? And why aren't other Muslim states coming to its aid? Why is it depending on the West? Because we're there?
I think it's very unfortunate that the Muslims around the world are not united. And since, you know, like Afghanistan all their neighbors are Muslim countries. However, there is very less contribution, you know, in terms of supporting Afghanistan. And I think we should be thankful toward West, you know, for extending their support to Afghan economy. There is no doubt that the Western economies have their own interest in Afghanistan. However, despite that, you know, one shall be thankful to their, you know, wholehearted support. At least, you know, they are trying to you know, cover the Afghan need, and in some ways they have left the country from the you know, drastic poverty. Even though there is still a lot to do, but you know, the situation is very rapidly changing toward negative side.
Well, you mentioned before the word stabilize. What does that mean? What were we stable? What did we think we were stabilizing?
Well, it can be an overarching terminology, stabilize. And personally, by that, I mean, you know, to have prosperity in Afghanistan, to have peace, to have the opportunities to invest in Afghanistan, to live in Afghanistan, to freely express yourself, you know, in that country. So it's an umbrella term where you know, many rights can be enjoyed. And right now, even for the last 20 years, Afghans are deprived of those rights, be it intentionally or because of the situation on the ground. So every Afghan right now, you know, wish for peace in a stabilized Afghanistan where, as I keep saying, there is peace, there is prosperity, they have opportunities to work, to go to school, to enjoy their basic human rights, which is yet to be achieved. And I hope, you know, international community, especially the Muslim countries, you know, they unite and hammer a deal for the upcoming, you know, government of Afghanistan.
That's very interesting, because I'm looking at TV blasts about the Taliban. And the Taliban, these are students, they're fully grown men now, and some of them are old men. What do you think their vision is for Afghanistan?
Well, if we look back to the 1994, the Taliban was absolutely a brutal regime. There is no doubt in that. they impose a very strict interpretation of Islam, especially toward women and minorities. But if we look at the circumstances then was totally different. They were a very nascent organization. Most of their leaders and food fighters, just came out of Islamic madrasas from Pakistan, where they had very less international knowledge or knowledge about politics. However, for the last 20 years, most of their leaders are actively involved. They are observing the situation. And now that they have come to Kabul, they have captured the Kabul, they seems to be very much different than what they were in 1994. They are assuring the citizens of Afghanistan that they will ensure their basic right, including the right of women and minorities. They are asking women to join them, in establishing a new era for Afghanistan, to work shoulder by shoulder with them. And apparently they have been doing this for the last 3 days. For the first time, people were surprised to see the Taliban members interviewing, with Afghan women. So this is a very, a positive sign for Afghan people that they have good intention for the country. However, later on, the time will decide whether that was just, to show to the world that they have a relatively moderate image, or they are in fact, a change and want to ensure a stable Afghanistan. The time will decide that.
Well, as we talk about Afghanistan, Afghanistan itself has been through many incursions from empires large and small, and it has managed to throw off the yoke. Don't you think that Afghans have a right to determine their own sovereignty without interference from the European Union or the American Canada?
Well, I think this is the basic right of every nation, to be self-determined and have their own sovereignty. And Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan are no exception. As you rightly mentioned, many, great powers of the time, they invaded Afghanistan, and the Afghan people always resisted, the brutality of foreign occupation, and they have been successful. Even though the shape of, or the context of intervening in Afghanistan was different depending on country to country. There was a great difference between the US intervening in Afghanistan and the Soviet Union intervening in Afghanistan. Irrespective of those, intervention, Afghan people should be left, to have to determine their own future. And even though the US said that Afghanistan is a sovereign country, however, the foundation of Afghanistan was very weak to determine itself. And this was, the basic reason for the Taliban to wage, the so-called jihad against the invaders. And they said that our country has been invaded. And for that reason, they said that they wanted to fight for its own liberation and the liberation of the people of Afghanistan. This is what the Taliban, movement was mostly based on. And but there's a huge debate whether Afghanistan was occupied by Western power or not. So it's very complex, to get into this, and it might take hours to discuss that.
Well, many Americans have been listening to the radio shows are saying, we've spent trillions of dollars in Afghanistan. Where did the money go? We didn't spend trillions of dollars on our own infrastructure, our own schools.
That's a very interesting question. First, when they say they spend trillions of dollars, most of that money went to the military mission of the United States, and a very small fraction of that went to the economy of Afghanistan. Let me give you an example. For example, every food, like small item, came from abroad, to the United Nations. And if that item, say, for example, its value has $1 in Afghanistan, that was counted as hundreds of dollars. So that, and the accounting, this number seems to be way larger than it is. And as I said, a very small fraction of that money was given to the Afghan government, to spend where actually the need was. Mm-hmm. And personally, I have always been opposing, that there is no military solution for Afghanistan. And as a student of learning terrorism, I found in my research that there were many ground causes for terrorism, beside foreign, the so-called, the Taliban call it occupation, and that was unemployment, socioeconomic condition of the people. Many people joined, the Taliban insurgency because they had no other option left. They were not supported by the Afghan government, maybe intentionally, or the Afghan government, was very poor to support those people. And then those loopholes were filled by the insurgency. In many cases, the insurgency offered money to fighters. And this is how, when the Afghan government was poor, it was not able to establish school in remote areas, and people were not educated. And if people are less educated, this has been the case in Afghanistan, they are more likely to join, the extremist groups. They can be relatively easily brainwashed. And this is how, things become worse and worse. So all those—
I worry about these terms all of us use. It's extremist, it's terroristic, it's everything bad. When do you become, those terms were used against Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. Everybody's a terrorist. Everybody's an extremist. Are they really?
Well, the word terrorist and extremist, this again is a very subjective, depending on people to people. Maybe Afghan terrorists will be heroes for some, and for some they will be, freedom fighter, but for others or their enemies, they will be terrorists. But there is no question that there were a terrorist group in Afghanistan. And now the big question one may ask, whether the Taliban, the people who say that they are fighting for the liberation of Afghanistan, were a terrorist, or are they a terrorist group right now? This is again, depending how you define, terrorist. So from my knowledge, as a student of terrorism, they have been involved in some acts of terrorism. However, they cannot fulfill the criteria which are, laid down by some of the scholars, such as Alex Schmidt and all those, prominent scholars. So then they can be defined as insurgency. And the Taliban never claimed, that they are, taking the lives of the civilians. They say that we will never, ever, intentionally kill any civilians, which, distinguish them from terrorist group. And I think to a great extent, they are right, and personally, I do not see the Taliban right now as terrorist group based on what they are doing at the moment and what they have been saying. And as I mentioned, there have been some exceptional cases where there were cases, when the civilians were suffering a lot.
Thank you, Irfan Yar, for your time and all that body of knowledge you have sitting in that chair with you. And now back to Samana. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Right-wing politicians in France, like Darmanin, have opposed the government's move to provide refuge to Afghan nationals. To discuss this topic about Afghan refugees in France, we have with us Yasser Douati. He's a French human rights and civil liberties advocate, community organizer, and a political analyst. Welcome, Yasser.
Thank you for having me.
So we've been, following the news, and we hear there are Afghan refugees currently on the streets in Paris. Can you tell me how they have been treated?
Well, very badly. As at first, they were always called and identified as unwelcome aliens into France. For many of them, it was an invasion of people, of undesirable people. And this discourse came not only from the far right, but also the mainstream conservative party. And to make things even worse, supposedly the French left bought into this narrative, and beyond speaking of undesirable individuals, hunted these people, especially in the city of Paris. Paris is under the mayorship of Anne Hidalgo, a socialist mayor, and herself, has turned people's lives from the migrant communities impossible. For example, if you're an Afghan refugee or African refugee, she made it impossible for them to set up, tents on the sidewalk. When they apply for shelter, there is no room. When they apply for paperwork, it takes between 2 and 3 years for their papers to be processed. And the socialist mayor of Paris went so far into criminalizing the Afghan refugees that she had brought in huge rocks to be put on the sidewalks in order to prevent Afghan refugees from being able to sleep on the sidewalk while, for example, waiting in front of the building of the France Terre d'Asile, which processes their refugee statuses. So here we have this, humongous hypocrisy in France towards Afghanistan. So France did not think twice before sending troops to bomb civilians over there, supposedly against, in the name of the war against terror, with the results that we all know in terms of civilian casualties and civil liberties. But when Emmanuel Macron spoke of Afghanistan, it didn't take him 2 minutes before speaking of an influx of, almost an invasion-like flow of Afghan refugees. He didn't speak of the human tragedy taking place over there, France's responsibility in destabilizing Afghanistan, and on top of it, the fact that for 3 years these people have not been treated very well. And just to finish it, to give you a few figures, excuse me. Just to give you a few figures, around 10,000 Afghan refugees have sought asylum, and barely 60% of them see their demands being processed. And among those, to make things even worse, they fall under the so-called Dublin Accords, which means they will have to apply in the country that has first registered them in Europe. So if they are in France, for example, and they were registered in Italy or in Greece, they will have to be sent back over there. So how is France truly taking this matter seriously? I really don't know. But honestly, it is also a moment of shame for this country.
What has the reaction been to Macron's statement?
Many people in France were indeed shocked by his discourse that in the midst of a human tragedy unfolding before our eyes, that Emmanuel Macron would take the stage, excuse me, I will have to be blunt, as if his word matters on the international scene, but he took the stage to play into the far-right rhetoric that we will have to fight against incoming refugees. So the reactions were split. Some people praised it, some said it wasn't enough, but also many people were shocked that Emmanuel Macron would be so heartless and have such short memory, i.e. that France bears a responsibility over what's going on today in Afghanistan.
And how has the Afghan woman being used in the rhetoric against Afghan men and this hypocrisy that you're talking about?
Oh, well, this is, typical white saviorism that, they were out there to save women from Afghanistan. But when Afghanis ask for asylum in France, they are unwelcome. So, of course, they use the same colonial rhetoric that we are going to defend Afghan women against Afghan men. But in the meantime, when these Afghan women seek asylum in France, they are unwelcome. The same thing, with Arab women and throughout the former colonies, African women as well, that it allows white men to feel empowered that they are in a God, given a mission to save non-white women. But in the end, nothing good comes out of it. They are just being used to legitimize Islamophobia on the one hand, and further put, white, supremacy as the norm, that these women need the assistance of white people. I would hope that France would support, for example, all the organizations that come to help Afghan refugees in the streets of Paris, instead of posing as the saviors of the Afghan people, at the same time not opening their doors when they seek asylum.
That was going to be my next question. How is the French Muslim community reacting to the new refugees that are coming in and the refugees that have been on the ground for 3 years? could you share with us what here in the United States, many of the shops, the ethnic Muslim stores have boxes out collecting donations outside mosques. What's the scene like in France?
Well, I will have on this one to be quite blunt again when it comes to Islamic organizations. Now, grassroots organizations have been indeed doing the best they could in order to provide shelter, to provide food, provide assistance, and sometimes even psychological support. But unfortunately, we do not see mosques opening their doors to Afghan refugees. I mean, even any refugee coming to knock on their door, and it is not a coincidence that refugees would go and knock on the door of churches and not mosques, because mosques, unfortunately, do not welcome them. Mosque, managers and heads of mosques do not feel concerned by the topic. And unfortunately, we see, of course, all this rhetoric about so-called, the brotherhood of between Muslims, etc. But we see nothing of it. So the people who have power among Muslims are doing absolutely nothing. But the help is coming from everyday citizens who have a sense of responsibility in terms of having to not only assist refugees, but also to remember that they are, of course, in a much more comfortable situation than those people crossing half the world to seek asylum in a foreign country.
You're absolutely right about that. That the responsibility lies not just with the governments, but with the people as well. We are just living in the Western world. Our taxes were used to bomb and displace Afghans, and we do have a responsibility. What would you like to see more from the French Muslim community as well as from the government before we?
Well, from the government first, that they take their responsibilities, that instead of sending bombs abroad, they should be sending more economic help to help people avoid a situation where they were, pushed towards asylum and exile. All the people living in African nations and Asian nations do not do so because they are happy to do it and because they are just looking for material wealth. They do it because they are either fleeing war, dictatorship, starvation, instability. And France has a huge responsibility in that, not only in Afghanistan, but also in throughout Africa. And France's responsibility keeps being pointed at by various NGOs, various investigations, various revelations. But at the same time, while France intervenes to destabilize these countries, it does nothing to welcome that misery it has created. So no, I do not blame a person who risks his or her life to cross the world and seek a better living for himself or herself or their children. As for communities in France, be it religious communities or non-religious communities, they have to understand that the comfort they live in is acquired on the back of the suffering of other people. And I'm going to again quote to you, for example, the former president of France, Jacques Chirac. A few years before passing away, he admitted in an interview that the money French people have in their pockets, a huge part of it comes from Africa. And today, if France can, pose as a wealthy nation and pretends to be a country where people have a decent living, people in France have to understand that this comes at a cost, and that cost is being, borne by people in the so-called third world. And now, right now, you mentioned, communities. Let's speak about the Muslim community. I do not like to, speak of the Muslim community. I don't think it exists as such. There are Muslim communities throughout France, and I think it is their responsibility to apply pressure on imams, on clerics, on public figures, on people, rectors of mosques, so they would welcome these refugees not only for shelter or food, but also to offer them opportunities to properly integrate. These people come oftentimes that don't speak the language, that don't know the culture, they have no one around. And if supposedly religious communities constantly lecture the rest of the world on hospitality towards the poor, and that the prophets before were poor people, and that they were helped by, and supported by others, the rich and the very few wealthy people who helped them, then do your job. And don't shut the mosque when a person comes knocking on the door just seeking help. And I recall in my neighborhood on the south side of Paris, many times you will see Iraqi refugees, Afghani refugees, Somalis, or for example, people from the Ivory Coast or other countries in sub-Saharan Africa would be literally unwelcome. So how shameful it is to use the name of a Muslim community when you have other Muslims coming from war-torn countries and then seek help and you deny them. And at the same time, you pause and say, oh, well, we care about Muslims abroad. First, care about your community, and that community also cares about these refugees. And again, I cannot highlight it enough. Imams have a huge responsibility. And I know as a human rights activist, it is not my position to call on clerics to intervene, but we need all the help we can get. And mosques and imams are not, a foreign entity or living in a bubble. They are part of this society, and if this society requires us to show solidarity towards the poor and the people fleeing wars abroad, then so do mosques, synagogues, churches, imams, rabbis, and priests. And again, I repeat, open your doors. One day or another, you might face the same hardship, and you would be happy someone is out there to give you a helping hand.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your words. This is a message to those in our audience watching. Open your doors. Even here, there is an influx of unaccompanied children who have come into the United States and need foster homes. They need parenting. They need people who can take them into their homes so they don't get lost in the secular world. So as anchors at a Muslim Network TV, we urge the community here and in Canada to take in and be responsible for these refugees who are coming in.
Thank you, Samana. We have with us Professor Aaron Lotus, who is an associate professor at the engineering practice at Purdue University, Indiana. He has worked with FDA for 13 years in this particular process. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Tell us, what does this approval mean?
Right, so it's really a different bar from what the emergency use authorization was. So for emergency use, FDA is looking at, do they think that it's likely this vaccine would be effective? And they're looking at, what are the known and the potential benefits, and what are the known and the potential risks? And do those benefits outweigh the risks of what we know at that time? So that's the bar for emergency use. For the full approval, now FDA has received additional data. They've got more extensive clinical data. They have much longer follow-up from the clinical data. And along with that, it's not just the clinical information, but what about manufacturing, the manufacturing process of the vaccine, the quality testing, things like shelf life. So there's just a lot more information that goes into that review. So FDA has taken all of that, undergone that full review process, and at this point, FDA can now come out and say they agree this vaccine is safe, it is effective for preventing COVID-19, and that's more than what they could say before.
Well, I don't know what difference it actually makes, because, when I went to take vaccine, it was common knowledge, it is safe, it is important, it's critical, it's patriotic duty, go get it. So many millions of people got it. Now, once I arrived there, after they gave me the vaccine, a whole lot of writing would say it is only provisional and this and that, lot of ifs and buts. So what practical difference this approval means?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the same as you, I hear from over the past weeks and months, I think we hear from a lot of people, this vaccine is very safe, it's very effective, but you never heard that from FDA, because that's not what FDA was reviewing. And FDA couldn't say that, and the manufacturer, Pfizer, couldn't say that. So it's an interpretation, and at this point, that's not to say FDA didn't think it was safe or effective, but that's not that bar they were looking at. It was a lower bar. So now I think we can be even more confident that based on all the information that FDA's reviewed that's been available, and additionally, I think what took a little more time is there had to be more time to get longer term follow-up. So now these vaccines have been out. Most of these patients have been followed for at least 6 months. So there's a lot more, I think we'd have more confidence, more assurance in these vaccines going ahead. And, I think that may be, and we may get into this discussion more, but that may be what caused some people to be a little hesitant on being vaccinated until now.
What is the politics of it? President Trump was pushing for it. He got a big operation going to fund it, Operation Warp Speed, and things of this nature. So government is pushing for it, and the people are worried about the pandemic. So do you think it is not just the scientific and academic process of approval, but a public pleasure and the demand and the need also plays a role in this thing?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's maybe, unfortunately, the politics have entered into that, have started to sway people's opinion on trusting in the data, trusting in the government, trusting in what people are saying. So I think from there, what we have to do is take a step back, look at the data and look at the science that's out there. And if we don't trust what the government's saying, most of the data is available to everybody. We can look at the same papers, we can look at the same numbers, and we can see where this is coming from. It's not, it's not secret information, it's all out there. And I think that can help us, make that decision if we do have maybe a level of discomfort with what we're hearing, and try to avoid getting mired in the politics, but instead look at the science and the data and the safety behind it.
Why it is not approved for this people under 16 years? Because they are already getting the shots. So while it is, this particular thing is still not approved for them. Emergency approval, but not the full approval.
Correct. So it still just has the emergency approval for 12 to 15. So the full approval is 16 and up. And the real reason for that is that the initial clinical study only enrolled patients that were 16 years of age and older. So the clinical study in younger children, those 12 to 15, didn't start till a little bit later. So there's simply a lag time between those studies. So in order to get the additional follow-up for those patients, it's going to take a little longer. But there are plans that I've seen in some of the reports that now that it's approved, there will be a supplement to add full approval for those younger kids. So I expect we'll see that coming probably in the near term, assuming that the safety and effectiveness data continue to hold.
So what's the future about the children who are under 12?
And again, those started even later than the ones for 12 and over. So there's no emergency use authorization for those yet. I think it's just a matter of time until enough data are collected. And then certainly those need to be reviewed by FDA to ensure there's no safety concerns in younger children. I mean, there was some concern that we've seen, and there's a warning on the labeling for the approved vaccine for myocarditis and pericarditis.
What are those warnings about?
Right. So those, as you may have heard in the news, that's can be an inflammation of tissue around the heart, which it could be serious. In nearly all cases, it was not serious, but there are some where it was, and these patients need additional treatment. So what the warning for the approved vaccine is that you should be aware of this, and it specifically calls out that the risk is highest in males and those under the age of 40, and in particular for those between the ages of 12 to 17-year-old males. So the benefit, as FDA has reviewed, the benefit is still greater than the risk, but it's something that people need to be aware of. And FDA is actively working with Pfizer to continue the studies and to collect more data to evaluate, are there any long-term concerns with that?
So the warning serves what purpose? I mean, the whole world and the media, everyone is asking people to go get the vaccine. But if there's a warning on that thing, which I even don't get to touch somewhere in that box, that warning is what? To legally protect the company so nobody files a lawsuit?
So I see the purpose of that warning as really raising awareness so that if you would give the vaccine, you should be aware of this is a potential risk. So if you would have any problems that might suggest, this is happening to you or to your children, then to, consult your doctor and work with them for treatment. So it's really increasing that awareness. So when people do get that vaccine, they're looking out for particular risks that may be more common. Certainly, pain at the injection site, tiredness, fainting, those are what you might expect, but this one's a little different. So I think it's helping people be aware that this is a risk. So if you do get vaccinated, make sure you're paying attention. And if you start to have a problem, you need to do something about it. And it's also, certainly getting vaccinated is, I've been vaccinated, I'd recommend it, but it's a personal choice. You need to weigh what are the benefits, what are the risks. And it's not just the benefit of hopefully avoiding getting infected with COVID, but and the risk, there could be a risk of, well, if your kids are in school and they've been vaccinated, maybe they don't get quarantined, maybe they don't miss school that way. So there's all different risks and benefits for everyone to consider.
So what is the percentage of people who have taken the Pfizer vaccine who face those pericarditis or whatever is the name of that?
I'd have to look it up. It's a very low number. I don't quote me on that. I want to say it's somewhere in the 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. And again, most of those are very mild. It's something you might take, take some ibuprofen to treat. There's a very small number of cases, so it's very rare where you may need further treatment than that.
So now go ahead.
No, I'd say, so again, it's a very low risk, but I think it should help people. FDA is not trying to say there's no risk with this. This is what the data shows us, and they're very open in sharing that information.
Okay. Now it is already announced that in September, people can get the booster shot. Has the booster shot been studied that if somebody has, those people who are under 40, who has a small risk of the heart condition, a male under 40, if they get the booster shot, don't you think that risk will be even increased further?
So right now, the booster shot is only available under emergency use, and that's only available for certain immunocompromised individuals. So it's still not widely available to the population. And I expect, again, that that's something that needs more data. I think it's being studied. And I have no doubt that that's probably one of the key factors that FDA is reviewing to ensure that this booster shot is safe for these patients to receive before we get first emergency authorization, and then certainly before we get full approval.
What about the Moderna? Are they in the process of moving forward with full approval?
So the Moderna application is also under review by FDA currently. It's a little bit behind. I don't think it's too far behind Pfizer. The Pfizer BioNTech was submitted just a little bit earlier. So I think I would expect that's probably why we haven't seen the Moderna one, but probably in the very near future we will.
Professor Lotus, with this emergency approval and the full approval, do you see there are going to be millions of people lining up? Now it is fully approved. Let me get the shot.
I would think it should certainly. I think there'll be some people that were kind of waiting on this. They were hesitant before. Maybe they weren't confident in, they still felt it was experimental, or they thought maybe it had been rushed through, or FDA hadn't reviewed it thoroughly. And now that it has been approved, I expect there will be an increase in people that are willing to receive the vaccine.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, for your time.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching the best of Muslim Network News. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.